Welcome. This is a video assignment on the great industrial boom of the 1920s. The term set forth in the Treaty of Versailles set the stage for the economic boom of the 1920s and the economic bust of the 1930s. A great industrial boom resulted from the emerging consumer goods economy of the 1920s. New products emerged in plastics and chemicals for consumers to buy. There are also new forms of entertainment to enchant Americans. We'll begin with transportation. Railroads, which had reached their peak mileage in 1916, suffered from the federal government's takeover of them during World War I. Control was returned to individual owners with the Transportation Act of 1920, but not without complete regulation. Fact is, the age of the railroad had passed, as new forms of transportation developed to move people faster. For long-distance travel, Americans started flying and riding the airplane. Invented in 1903 by the Wright brothers of Dayton, Ohio, the airplane took over the U.S. mail from the railroads in 1918. The airlines recorded over 73 million passenger miles by 1930. And leading the pack of daring aviators was a very photogenic playboy from Houston named Howard Hughes. And in 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew nonstop across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis. For short-distance travel, the railroads succumbed to the automobile as people began to move from the inner cities to suburbia. There were 3 million cars on the road in 1916, and in 1929 there were 23 million. Automobiles were first produced in the United States by Charles and Frank Deria in 1893. The dominant auto company was the Olds Motor Vehicle Company. This is Oldsmobile. By 1903, Henry Ford was producing cars. He mechanized Eli Whitney's assembly line to make affordable Model Ts in the 19-teens. According to Henry Ford, you could have a Model T in any color you wanted, as long as that color was black. As manufacturers learned that consumers purchase automobiles based on brand and not on the cost, the advertising industry emerged to increase competition among brands. For example, General Motors had top-end, high-cost brands, such as the Cadillac, and low-end, low-cost brands, such as the Chevrolet. While the advertising did not resemble the ads today in the sense that they depended on words and not pictures, it certainly was a step up from the ads of the 19th century. For an example of the Twenties ad, go to the Twenties section, Twenties module of Canvas. The banking and finance industry made it easier to purchase things on credit. Rather than going to the dealership and purchasing the car all at once, people would make a down payment on the car and then sign an agreement to make installment payments to the credit or finance company. Thus, using advertising and financing, General Motors had overtaken Ford as the most popular car manufacturer in 1929. Still, Henry Ford was one of the richest men in the nation. Automobiles also increased the demand for road and highway construction, gasoline and oil, automobile supplies, home construction, and tourism. The 20s saw the nation's first motor court or motel. It was also the decade that people started moving to Florida. For example, the population in Miami, Florida in 1920 was 42,753. By 1930, its population had more than tripled to 142,955 persons. Now moving to entertainment. Two things enchanted consumers in the 1920s, the radio and the motion picture. The radio has its origins in the late 19th century. Work in electromagnetism led to the discovery of radio waves in 1886. In 1894, Guglielmo Marconi started working on building a wireless telegraphy system based on radio waves. By 1900, Marconi had patented such a system and had developed it into a commercial communication system. In 1912, the vacuum tube was invented. Vacuum tubes allow for radio waves to be transmitted continuously. World War I accelerated the development of the radio for military communications, and vacuum tubes were applied to radio transmitters and receivers during World War I. By 1920, the first amplitude modulation, also known as AM, or continuous wave communications, hit the market. The first station to send messages over the air went in service in April 1909. By 1912, the federal government required stations to obtain licenses. From San Jose, California, Charles Doc Harold made daily news broadcasts, only to be interrupted by World War I. The first news station, WWJ, went on air in 1919. It was based in Detroit. WWJ was owned by the Scripps Company. The first commercial station to go on the air was KDKA in 1922. KDKA was from Pittsburgh. More towers and stations soon followed. 1927, Congress limited the number of stations and regulated wavelengths. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, was formed to oversee radio operations in 1934. David Sarnoff, head of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, also developed radio programming. In 1926, he launched the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, with two networks, the Red and the Blue. Many of the programs during this decade were variety shows, but one of the best-known programs of the decade was a comedy called Amos and Andy. In 1945, the SEC forced RCA to spin off its Blue Network, which then became the American Broadcasting Company, ABC. The other form of entertainment that enchanted Americans in the 20s was motion pictures. The concept of the motion picture developed also during the late 19th century and in the first decade of the 20th. In fact, Thomas Edison toyed with the idea of motion pictures, developing a device called the kinetoscope. By 1897, the Edison Company acquired their first motion picture patent. The first picture shown to audiences occurred in New York in 1896. In 1903, the movie The Great Train Robbery depicted the first full-length story through motion pictures. The first movie house opened in Philadelphia in 1905, and within 3 years, 10,000 movie houses were opened throughout the country. The first films were shot on the East Coast, most of them by the Edison Company in New Jersey. By the early 20th century, Edison, for all practical terms, had moved into software and had abandoned hardware. By the mid-teens, filming had moved to the West Coast because of the open space out west and the more temperate climate. In 1915, director D.W. Griffith made Birth of a Nation, a 2-hour film that marked the arrival of the modern motion picture. At the same time, Birth of a Nation presented a distorted image of Reconstruction that led to the resurrection of the Ku Klux Klan. Outcries over this film led Griffith to his next film, called Intolerance, which was a 3-hour film demonstrating mankind's persistent intolerance throughout the ages. The success and significance of D.W. Griffith is that the motion picture had finally arrived. By the mid-1920s, the motion picture industry ranked 4th in the nation in capital investment. Up to this point, all of these films were silent, meaning that the action was broken up by screens of written dialogue. Typically, any sound accompanying the film was a person playing the piano or organ at the front of the theater. Then in 1926, the game changed with the release of Don Juan by the Warner Brothers studio. It was the first movie with sound accompaniment. Then the next year, 1927, the Warner Brothers studio proved the success of what they now call talkies with the release of The Jazz Singer, which starred Al Jolson. Audiences loved Charlie Chaplin and considered him the top comic of the decade. But the advent of the talkie ended Chaplin's career, along with other stars of the silent era, including Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Rudolph Valentino, Lillian Gish, who was the star of Griffith's films, and William Randolph Hearst's mistress, Marion Davies. Also in 1927, Mickey Mouse starred in his first cartoon, Steamboat Willie. It was animated by Walt Disney. Cartoons and newsreels often were shown before the main feature, and soon other movie studios had their cast of cartoon characters as well. Warner Brothers started making cartoons in 1933, and in 1940, Bugs Bunny made his debut. Thank you for watching this video assignment on the great industrial boom of the 1920s, and may the force be with you.